I'm Christine Blower, I'm the chair of this session. I'm sitting between two people who need no introduction, but just because it's such a pleasure to be here, I'm going to introduce them anyway. So our first speaker, already mentioned any number of times from this platform this morning, is John McDonnell MP. And as if you didn't know, John McDonnell has been Labour MP for Hayes and Hollington since 1997. Over the summer, John acted as Jeremy Corbyn's campaign agent in his successful campaign. It's a bit understated, that. These are my chair's notes. His successful campaign. His brilliant and superb campaign, I'd have written. Anyway, 2 days after Jeremy was declared leader of the Labour Party, which we've already enjoyed a number of times, John was appointed as Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I have to tell you, some days after that, Kevin Courtney, my deputy, and I were in the DFE. We were downstairs having a cup of coffee, and John came in, not to be doing Shadow Chancellor stuff, but to be doing constituency work. He came in because he'd got a constituent who had an education problem. Quite a lot of us have got education problems, I can tell you. And he came down, and I can tell you that he is pretty much the only Chancellor of the Exchequer or Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer that I have ever actually wanted to hug. So thank you very much. John is, of course, a great friend of the trade union movement, and he was the parliamentary convener of the TUCG until his appointment of Shadow Chancellor, which is so important that he can't do that for us now, but that has been taken on by Ian Mearns, and we're very pleased with that. So, John, would you like to make some remarks for us? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, thank you. We're short of time. Okay, thanks. It's been a rough old week. And so it's good to be amongst comrades and brothers and sisters. You know my joke about the POA, I think. I'm an honorary POA life member now. And when I can remember, I set up the Justice Unions group, and when they came out during the dispute when Jack Straw was Home Secretary, they contacted me and said, look, we're coming out, we've had enough, we're coming out on strike. So I said, okay, I'll let Jack Straw know. So I phoned his office up and said, look, just to let you know, the POA are coming out. And they said, well, it's illegal. I said, who's going to lock them up then? And it's... There's a moral in that story there with regard to the trade union bill that's going through at the moment. Let me just say this very briefly, because like you, I've come here to listen to Yanis. I spoke on the same platform as him at the PCS fringe at the TUC, and we tried to have a conversation afterwards, but he was surrounded by about 50 fans trying to get his book signed, one of which was my wife, who sends her apologies today, but says, can she meet you at some other... Anyway, never mind. Someone introduced me at one point in time as the Yanis Varoufakis of the UK, and I said I could never be that cool. Never. Let me say what's happening at the moment. We've got the Comprehensive Spending Review on Wednesday and the Autumn Statement. Now, some of you may well have been following some of the detail of this over the last few days. The situation is this, to be frank. Osborne, in 2010, set out his fiscal approach, which was basically a promise to cut the deficit completely by this year and to reduce the deficit significantly. And his target on the debt was about 69% of GDP by this year. So at that point in time, most of us told him that there was no chance, there was absolutely no chance whatsoever of reducing the deficit on that scale, eliminating the deficit within 5 years and reducing the debt on that scale. The only way it could be done is by massive investment and growing the economy, which he wasn't willing to do. So we're now in a situation where none of those targets have been met. This year, he's down to about, he's reduced the deficit by about half. And instead of the debt being 69% as he predicted, it's now above 80% and getting worse by the minute, because he tried to engender, typical politician that he is, he tried to engender a sort of mini boom before the last general election to bring in some votes on the basis of they thought he could convince people that they were economically secure. So this week, we're now in a situation where on Wednesday he'll come before the House of Commons and he'll present plans for a cut across government departments of about 20–25% overall. In addition to that, he'll make a big fanfare of, I'm sure he's going to do his Bob the Builder speech from Tory party conference about how much he's going to invest in the economy. But it looks as though on his plans, the investment in the infrastructure, skills, etc., will be reduced. Now, our target, just to stand still from the OECD, is about 3.5% of the GDP. And his Red Book predictions, it's going to go down to 1.4% of GDP, possibly the lowest in the G7. So, in addition to cuts, and despite what fanfare we brought forward in terms of investment, a level of investment that isn't even just maintaining the basis of what we'd expect from an economy in the 21st century. And I think what he'll try and do is jiggle the figures a little bit, and he'll come out with some announcements about some improvements in some areas around pensions and maybe a bit around council tax lift to tackle social care. But the reality is it will be a prediction of another 5 years of grinding austerity. Grinding austerity. And why is that happening? Well, at the moment, one of the reasons is because of having failed to invest for 5 years, despite limited growth in the economy, actually that growth even now is beginning to fall back. It looks as though manufacturing will certainly go into recession this month. In terms of the current account deficit, that's what they used to call in the old balance of payments that used to always worry past governments. We're now in a situation where we have a current account deficit with the rest of the world on a scale that we've never seen before in our history. And part of that is because we just don't trade in the way we did, we don't make things anymore. But in addition to that, part of that is the foreign assets that were owned by the UK is not retrieving the money that it used to. But in addition to that, we've sold off so much of our assets that actually income has been driven out of the UK into the hands of foreign investors. And I have to say, most probably the Chinese People's Republic. Now, I never ever thought that I would see a Conservative Chancellor as a campaigner for the nationalisation of our industries by the Chinese Communist Party. It is... I don't know what Mao's doing in his grave. Whether it's spinning or smiling, I don't know. But in addition to that, the reason for another 5 years of austerity under the Tories is basically his plans to cut the corporation tax to the largest corporations in our country. His ambition over the next 2 years is to reduce corporation tax to 18%. The lowest in the G7, the lowest in Europe. And his argument is that by reducing taxes well, it's the old trickle-down argument, isn't it? By reducing taxes to corporations in this way, he'll attract investment and companies, etc. What's happening this year, is those companies are taking the tax cuts, they're increasing the dividends to their shareholders on a scale we've not seen before, but in addition to that, they're hoarding money. Yanis and I have been having a conversation about how much. The predictions are about, and the corporations, they're sitting on about 750 billion. Well, I'm trying to be conservative about this. I'm saying about 400 to 500 billion. So they're sitting on money, earned income. They're sitting on refusing to invest. And to be frank, they're laughing all the way to the bank because in addition to that, he's giving them £110 billion a year in tax reliefs, or what they call tax expenditures, which are meant to somehow incentivize them to invest. And our investment levels, I just tell you, in science, where we excelled as a country, in science our investment level is down to 0.5%, less than 0.5% of our GDP. Our science and budgets have been cut by $1 billion over the last period. We're falling behind the rest of the world on some of the scientific breakthroughs that we discovered. I was at Imperial College yesterday launching a statement around where we should go from here in terms of our investment strategy. And the news basically is that link with universities that we used to build up for the research that we would do, the research and development that could then set off with, yes, entrepreneurs and others to develop the products and new markets, we're being driven into the sand by a lack of investment. That's where we're at. And yet on Wednesday, I tell you, the media will portray George Osborne as the saviour of the country, someone with a long-term, if I hear that expression again, I'll throw up, the long-term economic plan, and all the old slogans will come out. Fixing the roof while the sun shines. All this cobblers, that pardon the expression, he comes out with. What we've got to do is, of course, we've got to oppose austerity wherever it comes. And I tell you, I'm fearful. I'm fearful. I met the local government leaders last week, Labour local government leaders. They're telling us discretionary expenditure is virtually gone now. We're down to our statutory duties. And on social care, they're saying we're near to collapse in the next 2 years unless we get some additional support. They're running their reserves down now. Now, Osborne looks as though he's going to offer them a 2% increase on the council tax to cover that. That isn't enough. The consequences of collapsing social care means that people turn up at accident emergency services or they suffer. So the NHS now is going to offer maybe 8 to 10 extra billion pounds. At the same time, he's asking them to make savings of £22 billion. And you know as well as I do, in our area, every area now, the NHS is in crisis this winter. But also, let me just say this as well. Those people working within our public service and in the private sector are under intense pressure. I don't know, you may have seen the survey from 2 weeks ago of the increase in suicides amongst firefighters, police officers and other public sector workers. Under pressure because they're doing long hours for less pay with their conditions and their pensions continuously under threat. That's the life that they expect us to lead. And what we're saying very, very clearly now, and I'll sum up at this because we've got limited time and we want to listen to Yanis and we want to go into questions as well. The future is this. If the Tories continue with their plans, we have no other option but to resist them in every way we possibly can. And that means, let me be clear, that means mobilising our communities now in an anti-austerity campaign that this country has not seen before on this scale. Linking trade unions with the new leadership of the Labour Party and all other progressive organisations into an anti-austerity campaign that exposes what's happening on the ground to people, so we don't get divided and isolated. The reason they're introducing the trade union bill is because they know the trade union movement is the one organisation that's left on any scale with the resources, with the experience to mobilise that resistance campaign. Now, for the first time in a long time, alongside the trade union movement, you will have a Labour leadership committed to anti-austerity campaigning. That's the breakthrough of Jeremy Corbyn. Secondly, we need to move on from austerity and present our alternative. Our alternative is to end austerity, and the way we do that is we end the tax cuts to the rich and the corporations. We start forcing them to pay their way and pay their taxes, ending the tax evasion and tax avoidance. We can make sure they no longer have the tax reliefs and then don't spend it in the direction in which we want. But in addition to that, we invest to grow our economy. That means investing in skills, it means investing in our infrastructure. We rebuild our economic base, but we do it with the intention that we harness all of our resources, and that means making sure that workers can sit on company boards, that we develop a cooperative movement, that we bring back mutuals, so we start controlling democratically our economy again. But we invest in a way in which the rewards of those investments are fairly shared through a fair taxation system, a redistribution of wealth, not upwards but downwards to everyone. We all have and achieve a democratic, free, prosperous society based upon a common effort. No longer, I believe, can we tolerate anymore the extremes of wealth and poverty that have happened under the Conservatives. No longer can we accept anymore the lack of democracy in our country, not just at the ballot box, but also in terms of economic democracy. In that way, I think we can rebuild our society and rebuild our economy. I just say this one thing, I said it yesterday in one of the speeches that I did around the economy. We've got a huge financial sector here, but we've got to rebalance our economy. Up in Sheffield at the moment, there's a huge rally going on for steel. We've got to rebuild our manufacturing base, but be clever about it, invest for the long term. And if that means public engagement, public intervention, state intervention, short-term nationalisation to rebuild the economy, that's what we need to do. But in addition to that, I have to say this. We've got to ensure that we build our economy on the basis of fairness and social justice. So it isn't just about fair wages, it's about making sure no one is left behind, no one is homeless, no one lives in poverty, and everybody has a future. It's called socialism. Solidarity.
You can applaud more at the end. We've got questions to get through, but before we get to the questions, we're going to hear from Yanis Varoufakis, who was, in his own words, it says here, thrust onto the public scene because of Europe's handling of the crisis. In January 2015, he was elected to Greece's parliament with, I'm reliably assured, the largest majority in the country, and served, as we all know, as Greece's finance minister. His stint in government ended when he refused, with a massive amount of integrity, I would say, to sign a loan agreement that would have condemned Greece to another calamitous debt cycle. Yanis, the floor is yours.
And now you're going to hear everything that John said in a Greek accent. I have absolutely nothing to add, except I can rephrase it in my inimitable accent. Perhaps I can dampen spirits a bit by speaking or commencing with a reference to the bleakness of the days we're living through, with the revival of barbarity in the streets of Paris, and the way in which these events are feeding into the worst instincts of the establishment here in France, in the rest of Europe, in the United States, in the Middle East. But even before the events in Paris, there was a veil of discontent that was descending upon our lands throughout Europe. Now, the question is, why is so little hope growing amidst so many riches? And make no mistake, Britain, Europe, are very rich countries. Ask the refugees who come in and take a look at our cities, at our highways, at our railways, even the ones in Britain. I submit to you, friends and comrades, that hope requires the prospect of creative labor, creative work, an opportunity for people to actually unfold their talents while producing something worthwhile, and in the process, to create circumstances of security for themselves, their families, their communities, their nations, the world. But these creative jobs, the opportunity and possibility for creative work requires one thing: investment. And this is what John was referring to before. I'll just give you a number to add to a number that John has already given you. In the last 3 months in this country, around 76 billion was spent on all those things that help create wealth, like factories, manufacturing plants, roads, schools, machinery, all those things, land improvement, not land itself, but projects for improving land. All those things that create wealth and have a capacity to create new wealth, well, the investment in them in this country for the last 3 months was 76 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, until you realize that at the very same time there is 743, this is my measurement, 743 billion sitting there gathering dust, doing absolutely nothing. Idle cash. Now the question, of course, is why is this happening? Don't the owners of these 743 billion want to put them to work? They do. But they are immobilized by fear that if they do invest in machinery that produces goods and services, then there won't be sufficient demand for those goods and services, and they will lose their money. And in a never-ending circle of reinforcement, the power of negative prophecy, they don't invest, the demand does not materialize, and then they say to themselves, see, we were right. Yeah. This is a failure of the market mechanism to take the mountain of idle cash, to invest it into the productive capacities and means which will generate the incomes from which debts and deficits can be repaid. It's a failure of the machinery of financialized capitalism. It's very, very simple. So what we have in this country and in the rest of Europe, we have savings far exceeding investment. Corporations, my estimate is that corporations themselves, they are sitting on about 450 billion. Out of the 740-something, about 400 and something billion are corporation savings. Now, these savings far exceed investment. Now, it's a truth of algebra, a truth of mathematics, that if you've got companies, corporations, saving more than they are investing, so there is an excess cash mountain in the corporate world, yeah? If the government balances its books, do you know what this means? That you can't. It means that somebody has to have a deficit. If the corporations save more than they spend in investment, and the government balances its budget, it means that the middle class and the working class will have to be in the red. So when austerity is being presented to you as a parsimonious project, as a project for tightening belts and not overspending, this violates basic principles of logic. It would be possible for the government to balance its books and for you to balance your books if savings equal investment or investment equals savings. While investment is where it is, in the depths of its historical average compared to savings, Osborne's project of eliminating the budget deficit means that the people of Britain will be condemned to go deeper and deeper into the red. And this is a message you have to take out there. So the primary imperative of a civilized Britain, and indeed of civilized Europe, is to lift investment up. Markets will not do it because they are caught up in that self-fulfilling negative prophecy. So that is where we need politics. It must be a political mechanism, just like the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, just like what happened in this country in the 1960s, just like it happened in Brazil with the result of elevating millions of people out of poverty. The only way that we can restore investment is through the political mechanisms that democratic, liberal democracies empower us with. But Mr. Osborne neither understands this nor is interested in it. This is where Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell and the rest of their comrades have a historic duty to this country, even to capital in Britain, to make it work. How do you do it? Well, allow me in the few minutes that I'm going to occupy you further, say in 3 ways. A 3-point project. Firstly, you need to use the tax system to tax the hell out of retained earnings of corporations and give them tax breaks for investment. Secondly, when this country faced an existentialist threat from the Nazis, the government put together Bletchley Park, and Alan Turing invented the computer. The best minds were put together, state-financed, and they were given a task. Now we have a similar existentialist crisis. It's called climate change. It's called the environmental crisis. Why can't we have another Bletchley Park looking for ways of utilizing the resources and the intellectual resources of this nation and of Europe in order to create solutions to green energy which we don't have now? A Manhattan Project. The United States did it when they faced the prospect of a Nazi atom bomb. What did they do? They took the best minds, poured money on them, and the result of all that was what? The computer, the internet later on, and all those technologies that go inside our phones and allow neoliberals to celebrate the miracles of Apple and Microsoft. And the third thing we need is an investment bank, a public investment bank, which issues bonds that do one thing. They mop up all this excess cash from the financial sector, because the financial sector is interested in investing in good quality paper. So you create a public investment bank which issues bonds, borrows, in other words, from the private sector, from the corporations, and you have the Bank of England standing by in order to purchase those bonds in the secondary markets to do a proper quantitative easing program which puts cash into investment at an arm's length from government without inflating house prices in the south of England. Let me finish off with 2 points that take us beyond the realm of economics and finance. The first point has to do with Europe. Because in the next 18 months, you are going to have to make a momentous decision in the context of the referendum. My message will be very brief. A Labour-led Britain can lead Europe towards a Westminster model of democracy. Anything less than that, any attempt to escape from Europe will be futile and will simply strengthen both ultranationalism and the financial crisis which is afflicting the whole of Europe. You cannot escape Europe. You've got to help us democratize it. And finally, I finish off with a message of solidarity to the people of Paris, but also to the people of Beirut, the people of Mali, the people of Damascus, all those who are suffering from violence, from terrorism, and from war. And it's a very simple one. And it also comes in the form of a question. The thugs of ISIS, as they demonstrated in a number of places, Paris included, are prepared to die in order to close down minds and borders. Are we, the Democrats of Europe, prepared for the ultimate sacrifice to keep minds open and open borders? Thank you.
Okay, we've got 6 questions that have been sent in, and if my friends and comrades up here are brief in response, we'll be able to take some from the floor too. Okay, I'm not going to read the questions. The people who sent them are going to read them, and the first question is to Yanis, and it's from Matt O'Dwyer. Do I see Matt O'Dwyer? Does he have a microphone? Microphone is on its way. Thanks,
Hi.
Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yanis, nice easy one to start with. Based on your experience, Syriza Finance Minister, Sorry, how's that? Better?
Yes, good.
Okay, take two. Yanis, based on your experience as Syriza Finance Minister, what practical advice have you got for John as a future Labour Chancellor about holding the line when it comes to implementing a socialist programme in a hostile capitalist environment?
Okay. So you only have 2 minutes to answer that, Yanis.
John doesn't need my advice. He knows what to do. I've already given what advice I had in terms of focusing on investment by means of this three-pronged strategy for bringing it up in a way which not only helps with growth, but growth of the right things that the world needs.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's a very clear advice, and I'm sure, as you say, John already knows what it is. Our second question is from another Yanis. Yanis Varoufakis.
Oh my God, another Greek.
Hello?
Possibly another Greek, but certainly a junior doctor.
Hello?
So, Yanis.
Hello, can you hear me?
This is a question to both of our speakers.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Hello. You can hear me, yeah?
Yes.
My name is indeed also Yanis. That's a very rare phrase for me to use. I'm on the national executive of the BMA, of the Junior Doctors Committee in the BMA, the Doctors' Trade Union. And as many of you will know, a couple of days ago, we got an overwhelming mandate from our members in our ballot. And that was a mandate of 98% for strike action. Such a radicalisation of junior doctors is unprecedented in the NHS. And my questions are to all three of the members of the panel. The first question is, and the second one is a very short one. The first question is, what advice do you have for us in your long experience of dealing with vociferous smears and slander in the mainstream media? We are already seeing these directed towards us in the run-up to industrial action. And the second is a very simple question. If we do strike, will you support us? Will you defend us? Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. I think I can speak on behalf of the National Union of Teachers to say that you will certainly have our support. And in terms of smears in the press, you have to ride them out and do everything that you can through your own social media and your own communications. However, Yanis.
Well, of course, you'll have the support of the whole of the Greek nation, whose National Health Service is being battered by the misanthropy known as the Troika program. But besides that, concentrating on the situation here, it's important that, firstly, you maintain very strong solidarity with patients during your campaign and find creative ways of combining a strike with a support of those patients. Secondly, I think it's crucial that you find ways in which to juxtapose the way in which you're being treated with the way in which junior financiers are being treated. And to compare and contrast the manner in which the least useful professions are being lavished with immense riches, when those who are providing the most basic of goods are being treated like fodder to be discarded or to be abused. Finally, humor. The other day I was talking with Brian Eno, whose daughter is a junior doctor, and so I'm plagiarizing now a story that came from her. In a recent demonstration, I think it was in Manchester, she saw a banner saying, "I'm no gynecologist, but I know a hunt when I see it."
John has to take his head out of his hands now so he can give an answer.
Just when I thought I could keep out of trouble. Can I recommend having a warm, close relationship with the Daily Mail? I was saying to Yanis before we came on, they've stationed a person in my constituency for about 2 months now, trying to dig up any dirt they possibly can. They've spoken to every one of our relatives. They put an advert. I was saying to Yanis, they put an advert in a local newspaper where I lived as a child, saying, "Did anyone know John McDonnell?" And a woman wrote in and said, "I knew John McDonnell. He sat next to me at primary school at St Mary's Catholic School, and he used to whisper." God, they get inside the hall, and they used to whisper the maths answers to me, and it would mean that I didn't get the cane from Sister Pancratius, and I just thought that was lovely. It was lovely. But they'll run a story saying he cheats. I just say this, to be frank. This last 7 weeks that we've been in administration, the media assault on us, I think, has been a disgrace to any civilized society. It is. I know it's inevitable in the way the media ownership is in this country, but it does mean, to be frank, we have to commit ourselves now to a media reform, and we need to break up the ownership of our media, the monopoly. It was to give Ed Miliband his due. He included that in the last Labour manifesto, and that's why they came for him so much. Can I say one way you get around it, to be frank, is the way that we've tried to, is to create our own media. So Jeremy Corbyn touring around the country talking to meetings with thousands, 2,000 people, I think has been fundamentally important to getting our message across. But also the use of live media. We're making sure now that we go live on air as much as we possibly can, trying to avoid pre-records that can get stitched up, and recognise actually that the written media in this country now, very few people believe anymore, because it's become so appallingly extremely right-wing and, to be frank, I have to say abusive. So expect all that. Expect them to come for you on all of these matters. But I think the general public, I think the British public at the moment are overwhelming and on the side of junior doctors and realise that they've been pushed to the absolute extreme. I know no public servant who wants to go on strike. I know no one who wants to let down their patients or their passengers or whatever service they're in. I think people want to go to work and provide a quality service. And when you're faced with the threat to the junior doctors that Jeremy Hunt is at the moment, it isn't just about wages, it isn't just about the hours, it's about the safety of the patients as well. And that's why I tell you, you've got my support.
So thank you very much for that question, Yanis, and do take that back to all of your friends and colleagues. The next question is from Michael Bradley, and I have it written down here. So this is just a question, please, Michael, not a speech.
That's not fair. I'll ask my question. On the steering committee of United Resistance, and we've worked really closely with the TUCG in campaigning against the trade union bill over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, what happens outside Parliament can be absolutely central, and that's why the Tories are attacking the trade unions. It seems to me over the last couple of weeks, there have been examples of workers who have taken on the trade union laws. People have seen what happened at SOAS, where workers walked out in support of Sandy Nicol and won. At Bridgewater, where they walked out in support of Andrew Mutu and won. And in Lambeth Libraries, where people walked out, all unofficially, all breaking the law. And my question, right, stuff which John might agree with, right, so my question is really that do these workers who have defied anti-trade union laws, do they show us the way forward against the trade union bill? And is the trade union movement justified in taking on what are completely unjust laws and breaking them if those laws are going to be used to break our movement?
The situation that we're in at the moment on the legislation itself, as you know, it's gone through the Commons, it'll be into the Lords, and we'll do all we can. We'll do everything we possibly can to either defeat it or ameliorate it. But the reality is, unfortunately, the government's going to get its way and push most of this through. What does that mean? Well, actually it means, and I quote David Davis, a Conservative MP, It means they're introducing legislation last seen under General Franco. That's a Conservative MP actually saying, in opposition to the government, his own government, about the extreme nature of this legislation. This is an attack on a fundamental human right. It flies against all the International Labour Organization conventions. It undermines trade union rights in this country in a way, I've said before, is an existential threat to trade unionism in this country. And I think that's what this is all about. This is a scorched earth policy by this government to kill off trade unionism in this country within this period of office. And we've got to recognise the seriousness of it. That means, of course, using the democratic process to oppose it and to try and prevent it happening, but recognising that if it is introduced into law, if it is enacted, we still have the right, the human right, to resist it. Now, we would not have trade union legislation in this country at all, or any form of trade union rights, if we'd abided by the inherited law. We've always had to campaign in a way in which we feel is most effective to secure our basic human rights. And if that means defying unjust legislation, we not just have a right to do it, I think we have a duty.
No, not only do we have a duty, but there is also a long tradition going back to ancient Greek tragedy that confirms this. Sophocles' Antigone is all about the moral imperative to oppose unjust laws. And this is something that we must do. But at the very same time, we must not fall prey to a tendency to be reactive. Just reactive. So it was a mistake, I believe, in 1984 that we didn't have ballots during the miners' strike. We should shower them with democracy. We should use this legislation to have ballots where 90% of workers vote in favor of strikes, and to have ballots every day, even when we don't need to by law, just to drown them in the democratic process.
Thank you very much. Caroline Rowell. Oh, yep.
Hi. How could the financial sector be shrunk instead of only regulated, since this seems to have little impact?
No, we need the mic on louder.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. How could the financial sector be shrunk instead of only regulated, since this seems to have so little impact?
In terms of the finance sector in this country at the moment, what we're seeing is, as a result of the crash, as you know, there was that sort of period in which I described it as the sort of the Yellow Brick Road period, where we came to the end of the Yellow Brick Road, and then you were looking for the Wizard of Oz, and then the curtain got pulled back, and you saw not the Wizard of Oz, but that individual just pulling a number of leaders and shouting down microphones. And that was a sudden enlightening for a lot of people in this country, that all of a sudden you realize that this finance sector, the City of London, not only was completely out of control, but even the people who were meant to control it didn't even understand it either. And it was that for a short period, I think people understood that this system isn't just it doesn't work, but actually is completely, it is a casino that was out of everyone's control. And they were dealing with derivative mechanisms that became so complex that even those that were investing had lost control of it as well. And I think there was a sort of a short period, and everyone realized that this system is chaotic, out of control, unplanned, and completely crisis-ridden, and that we would see another crisis in a short period of time if we didn't do something about it. And so then there was a period in which there was an attempt to regulate, a bit of an open discussion, but that didn't last very long, and all of a sudden the waters closed over it again. And what regulation was introduced was extremely limited, and now is being, even the limited regulation that there was, the separations between retail and investment banking within the same bank, even those separations, those borders are being broken down. And I thought it was very interesting with Barclays only a few weeks ago, that they'd got rid of the retail bank manager they'd brought in to try and clean the act up, and they then brought back an investment banker to run the bank. And I thought that was indicative that they think it's back to square one, it's back to normal. The casino wheels are starting to flow again and spin again, and this casino is with our money. That's what's so angry-making, that they gamble with our money and that they take short-term profits, not long-term decisions about investment, and they always walk away. Only a few bankers have actually ever been dragged before the courts. And we saw the HBOS report this week, which exposed what was going on there in terms of, to be frank, a dereliction of duty at every level within that bank itself. So the regulation that was introduced was ineffective, and I think at the end of the day, if we don't address the matter, will actually cause yet again, not just more problems, but the potential of another financial crisis as well. That's why we're committed now to actually reviewing the banking system. We're actually doing a number of reviews from the Labour Party now. I've set up a review of the Treasury. I've set up a review of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England that will extend to the Bank of England as a whole. But we want to then extend that and have a discussion about, again, a further review of the banking sector. Yanis and I were talking about it before. Elsewhere, the Glass-Steagall Act that was introduced after the financial crisis in the 1930s in America, this split between retail and investment banking is what we argued for from the left during the last crisis and wasn't taken on board. We want to bring that back onto the agenda as well. So in that way, yes, we do want to introduce effective regulation. In addition to that, we also want to look at, as we've proposed the National Investment Bank, public ownership of that National Investment Bank, so it becomes something that we can rely upon to take wise, long-term, patient investment decisions. That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of the size of the finance sector, to be frank, my argument at the moment is to try and rebuild the other sectors in such a way that we're not unbalanced in the way that we are. And that does mean long-term investment, particularly in new technology, because I think that's our future as a country, but that new technology has to feed back into our manufacturing base so we get a balanced economy again. Now that's going to take, I think it's going to take investment, democratic control of the way investment is undertaken, working with the city and elsewhere, but making sure that we're actually introducing agreements with finance capital in a way that we can actually ensure we control the flow of capital within this country again. At the moment, it's the chaotic nature of the financial system which ensures that it's crisis-ridden. That's a huge agenda. In terms of the City of London at the moment, we're now going through a series of discussions about how we come, I suppose, in the first instance, come to get them to understand that actually we cannot tolerate a finance sector that is not contributing to the prosperity of the country overall. And that means that means a combination of regulation, democratic control, and in some instances public ownership as well. In that way, I think we rebalance our economy so that our finance sector becomes a contributing element rather domineering vehicle that is undermining the long-term prosperity of the country.
As you can imagine, this is a topic very close to my heart. So let me try to be succinct. In 4 ways is the answer to your question. How do we do it? In 4 ways. Firstly, as John said, a complete separation of banks or banking activities that involve deposits from depositors from the casino part of the financial sector. So if you are taking deposits, you can't speculate on financial derivatives and assets. Very simple. And if you want to speculate, that's fine, do it, but you cannot take deposits. Yep, number one. Number two, all derivative trades should be cleared through a clearinghouse that is open and transparent, and no more under the table private transactions between financial institutions, which then resort to the public sector for support after those transactions have collapsed. Thirdly, legislating against the way by which financial assets are assessed by credit rating agencies. It is quite absurd. I've been a teacher all my life. Imagine if my salary as a teacher were to come from the students just after they receive the result, the grade that I've given them. Yeah? Imagine that. Everybody would get an A. Which is precisely what happened during the years of profligacy of the financial sector, credit ratings. Well, this is what happens. There's a financier, creates a toxic derivative, and then auctions off the service of who's going to rate it. And says to credit rating agencies, come and give me the rating I want, and I will pay you in relation to the credit rating that you give me. That has to be legislated away. And one way of doing it is to have the central bank, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and so on, have their own credit rating scheme, so they do not rely on Standard & Poor's, because that will give new standards where everybody were going to be poor again. And finally, the way to calibrate, to reshape our economy so the financial sector is not so oversized, is to grow the rest of the economy. And to do it through the investment schemes that we were talking before about, and make it so that young people who graduate from the great schools, from the London School of Economics, from Cambridge, from Harvard, from INSEAD, and so on and so forth, do not immediately think that they want to dedicate 40, 50 years of their lives pushing paper and doing absolutely nothing that contributes to humanity.
Thanks very much. Our next question is from Rob Williams, and it's just a question to John.
Christine, Rob Williams, sending my solidarity, John, from the National Shop Stewards Network to this event, but also John and Jeremy's anti-austerity campaign. First of all, I just want to ask everyone to send a message of support. This is Clive Walder and John Vasey, sacked CWU reps from BT and Royal Mail. Just send a message of support to them. I just wanted to ask a question. John, correctly, we would all support you in building a mass movement against austerity in the communities. Next Wednesday, more cuts are coming down our way into those communities. And therefore, in 2012, you played a major part in inaugurating a conference of Labour councillors against the cuts to look at how we could resist those cuts. And I think that is something that I wanted to ask you, particularly as those councillors, 100 Labour councillors, are going to be in the front line, as they have been over the last 5 years. Those councillors combined have a combined capital of £70 billion, of reserves, something like £7 billion. We could come up with a strategy that sends a clear message that is a campaign against austerity. Thanks.
I think I said earlier, I met with a number of the Labour Council leaders a week ago, and all of them are reporting back the scale of the impact of the cuts so far and the concerns that they've got if they're asked for another 20%. As I said, Osborne looks as though he's going to allow them to have a marginal increase on the council tax to cover adult social care, or social care generally, but that most probably won't make up for the scale of the cuts so far. The problem that individual councillors have got, and I can completely understand it, in the 1980s when I was chair of finance on the GLC, it was almost like halcyon days basically, and we'd agree no-cut strategies and we'd be able to campaign against them, and we weren't in the same situation as it is today, which is the Tories got wise to this campaign that we could undertake, and they introduced legislation whereby individual councils if they don't bring a balanced budget in, and those periods in the 1980s, we could take a period of time of campaign to do that. They got wise to that, so they introduced legislation where now we have a process where if the councillors don't agree a balanced budget, the officers literally within 24 hours can do that. Now I find that totally undemocratic, and I find it abhorrent because of what it effectively does. It centralises the state in the hands of the Secretary of State for communities and local government, able to give a diktat on virtually what every local council budget will be. The reality is the enemy here is central government, the Tories. So what I've said to the council leaders is that after the comprehensive spending review and after the local government settlement, we'll come back together, and from the Labour Party we will launch a national campaign. No longer let individual councillors be isolated or individual councils on their own, but we launch a national campaign against the cuts. And we expose what's happening on the ground, and we mobilise our communities. It's the point Yanis made about the doctors. We've got to ensure that along with the councillors and the campaigners we mobilise those who are recipients of those services that are being cut. The recipients of those services that have gone already, the people who are actually now no longer get the social care or have had their library closed or have, in some instances, as you know, the Sure Star centres that have been closing down almost on a monthly basis right the way across the country. We've got to mobilise this as a community campaign. And we know who the real enemy is. The real enemy is not in your local council, the real enemy in central government. And I think we've got to focus on that. And in that way, we can remobilise what's been lacking in recent years, is a national movement around local council cuts. Because individual council campaigns that have gone on, I've admired them, but they've been isolated, and then one by one, unfortunately, they've been not defeated, but they've been marginalised to a large extent. We've got to make this now a national issue. In the same way we campaign around the NHS, in the same way we campaign around other national services, we've got to make this no longer just a local community campaign. We've got to combine them together and mobilise them as a national campaign. So we'll be suggesting to the council leaders when they come back together, when they've analysed the scale of the cuts that are being threatened, we'll be suggesting to them and recommending we launch a national campaign. And one way of doing that would be to bring together Labour councillors and others who are campaigning with us in a national conference, some form of national body in which we can express what I think is the deep, not just anger and anguish, but actually the real deep concern now that in a number of areas we're on the edge. We're on the edge of almost civilized practice. I do not want to see any more those elderly people getting those 15-minute visits by home helps and other home visitors because that's the only time they can spare, because that's the sort of oppressive regime they're working in, and they don't even get paid for their travelling time, and in some instances they don't even get the minimum wage. I think what we've got to do is expose that of what's going on the ground, expose what's happening to those families who no longer can attend the Sure Start Centre where their kids used to mix with others in the playgroups, etc. And yes, expose what's happening in terms of our housing crisis. Council, I don't know what it's like in your area, but tonight 200 families in my constituency will be in bed and breakfast. I went around in the general election photographing families living in sheds, beds in sheds, not less than 10 miles away from here in my constituency, in the 6th richest country in the world. I think we've got to expose that, and the local council campaign will be a national campaign that we'll lead.
Our sixth question, thank you.
Second World War. It was based upon an agenda, not of one that, and see, we use the word welfare now as well, which I find a bit abhorrent too. We introduced a system which was social security, so that everybody was secure, no matter what their situation in life, no matter what their situation in society. And that's what it was. It was basically, if you remember, we wanted to introduce a system where everybody was secure. There was always a safety net, but beyond that safety net, It gave the opportunity to fulfill their ambitions to the full. That's why education was free, because we wanted people to devote their talents, develop them in a way, because we knew not only they would enjoy it themselves, they'd fulfill themselves, but they'd contribute back into society. That's why we wanted the NHS free at the point of need, because we knew that actually that was the best way of ensuring equality of treatment and access of treatment. We introduced social housing, we introduced council housing, because we wanted everybody to have a decent roof over their heads, whether they were owner-occupiers or renters, it didn't matter. It was also a process of equality too. We introduced a system of rights so that people had access to the law to defend those rights, whether it was housing, social security, or whether it was education or whatever. All of that is being systematically dismantled. This government is introducing a scorched earth policy to destroy, dismantle every element of that welfare state in this next 5-year period, because they may well think this could be their last opportunity to get rid of the welfare state. And that's why they name it welfare. And there was one of their campaign leaflets from about 15, 18 years ago, 96, before the 97 general election, actually typified what they were about, which was introducing a very minimalist safety net at the best. Local authorities actually developing their charities so that welfare would become a charitable exercise, and then privatising every other element of the welfare state, NHS, etc. So it's privatisation, a charitable base, and a minimal safety net. That's a return to the 1930s. And do you know, if they get away with it through this comprehensive spending review in this coming period, the expenditure on the state will be back down to the levels of the 1930s. So I think we've got to now talk through and rebuild a welfare state which is based upon rights and opportunities and equality and social justice. And in that way, I think we can restore confidence in people, that we can have a society that we can genuinely call civilized, that we can genuinely really develop the next generation on. At the moment, the problem that I've got is that we're passing on to the next generation a limited level of expectation. You know, when I went on the student marches and all bloody Daily Mail did their usual bit, you know, I said then, education was always seen as a gift from one generation to another. And I always thought, I was brought up during that period when we saw the society developing in a lateral line, always going upwards. I never ever thought that we'd go backwards. I never thought the next generation would most probably run the risk of having a life expectancy less than mine. And that's where we've got to. So I think that's where we rebuild it. One based upon rights, and one based upon an absolute commitment that we're going to invest so that people's lives improve rather than get denigrated and pushed backwards.
I too dislike the term welfare state. I prefer to think of it in terms of the good society. So what should our ambition for a good society be? I think it should be the same as the ambition entertained by rich families for their members. If you have rich families, do not abandon a child if it proves to be incompetent and has a tendency towards malfeasance. They look after that child. And they do hope that one day he or she is going to develop their talents and they try to empower them. I think that's what the good society should try to do. The problem with rich families is that they don't care about extending their own ambitions to the ambitions of society at large. But this is why we need the labor movement. On a broader issue, however, just to add to what John said, we're moving in a direction due to technological innovation when labor-saving technologies are going to grow exponentially. And that is pushing our capitalist world into deeper and deeper crisis as output growth gets decoupled from employment growth. And as this is happening, the great question, of course, is going to be on the capacity of our societies to hold together. and to be able to be good societies in the way that I described it. And in this context, it will be of the essence to find ways of reconfiguring property rights over the wealth that we'll be creating, over the machinery that creates the wealth, so that in the end we can hope for a future where the machines, our own artifacts, become our slaves rather than the other way around. And just to conclude, it doesn't make much sense to try to reinvent good expressions when others have said it so well in the past. So the good society and the proper welfare state is the one, as Karl Marx put it, which takes according to people's capacities and gives according to their needs.
I'm afraid I'm simply only going to be able to take one question from the floor because we're out of time now, so I'm going to take you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your talks. I'm also a member of the Greek Mafia, so I'm going to ask a double question, actually, about two topics that kept coming up in every speech today.
Quick.
On the one hand, everyone was saying that, paying their respects to victims of terrorism. On the other hand, people were talking about the injustice of capitalism. But one thing that we didn't do was to put them together. And one argument that has been made before, and I won't reveal the the surprise guest, but you agreed, Yanis, was the idea that if you defeat capitalism, you also defeat terrorism and ISIS. So I wanted the speakers to comment on that. And the other question was to John McDonnell, who insists that if only we expose that there is no one behind the curtain, if only we all knew that behind the financial system, behind capitalism, there is this pathetic old man who pulls the strings. Well, I think we all know it. I think the Mail readers know it. I don't think it's enough to just expose it. I mean, because they are passionately invested in the ignorance of not knowing. So you have to go beyond exposing it.
Stop. Thank you. Okay. Yanis, and then John.
Very, very brief on ISIS. We can't afford to wait for capitalism to be defeated before we struggle against the atrocities that we have been seeing in the Middle East in particular and the echoes of them here in Europe. However, from an economic point of view, would it not be great if the great powers and our wonderfully wise leaders found a way of putting the fear of God, I'm saying this as an atheist, into the regimes of South Africa and the various... South Africa. Sorry. See, my wife is in South Africa, I got confused. The regimes of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and various other forces that are financing ISIS.
Whatever the solution is to ISIS, let me say this, it is not bombing Syria. Very briefly, you're right. It isn't enough just to expose the system. We have to offer an alternative to it, and also not just the alternative in theory, but the alternative route as well. And I think that's where we are now. I think that's where we actually are. I don't think the election of Jeremy Corbyn was done because all of a sudden a large number of people were just terribly despondent and traumatized after the May elections. I think the election of Jeremy Corbyn was as a result of the exposure of how our system is failing people, the demand for an alternative, and the search for hope. And I think that's where we're at. And what I find, despite all the media attacks and despite some of the internal dissensions that we've had, I think this could be possibly the most creative political period that we've had in this country for generations in how we explore.
One last submitted question. It's from Peter Davidson, and it's for Yanis. Quick, microphone here. Microphone here. No, it's coming.
Here it is.
It's coming.
It's behind you.
Pantomime season,
Okay, thank you. This question's for Yanis. I've read a lot of your articles, Yanis, and also your blog. And I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for your clarity, realism, and common sense, bringing that to the eco-political debate. And my question is really very simple. When you were Greek finance minister, on at least one occasion in Parliament, you wore a fantastic, psychedelic, beautiful, pink, grey, blue, and red shirt. Please, Yanis, will you tell me where I can get one?
Go on, where did you get it? Name that source.
I'm afraid you need a time machine that will take you to Sydney 1998. It's where I bought it.
Okay. Colleagues, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to our fabulous speakers, John McDonnell and Yanis Varoufakis. Thank you very much. Come on, they want photos. Yes.
Great.